Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really into the Krays, join our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London, where you will find stuff probably unavailable anywhere else. We're an established group with a large membership, and best of all, we're friendly. The link is in the YouTube description section.
Welcome back. We continue my story of my time with the Krays. They were crazy days. My name is Albert Donoghue. I was chief growler and rent collector for Ronnie and Reggie right up to 1968, when we were all arrested by Nipper Reid and his Scotland Yard team. On the firm, we were always bumping into celebrities. Over at the Pigalle Casino, which Tommy Cowley used to collect from every week, we'd meet Joe Louis, the former world heavyweight champion. He was employed there as the big-name greeter, but he was a very sad sight because the punches must have gone to his head. He'd gone mental. He'd shamble around eating peanuts, grunting at people. Obviously, he'd been hired for his name, not his manner. If you said to him, "Hello, Joe," he'd just go mumble and carry on eating his nuts. We patronised a lot of other clubs that the twins weren't protecting, and we didn't even attempt to nip. There was the Society in Jermyn Street, which we reached through an underground route from the Pigalle. The places were in parallel streets. Sometimes we'd go there showing people around. Sometimes we were just bored with sitting in some East End piss hole, and we'd say, let's go up west. Although we never protected the Society. We didn't take a monthly payoff. We never paid for anything either. Food, drink, everything was on the house, just like the Pigalle. So we used both places whenever we felt in need of a good night out or we wanted to pull a bird. That's another funny thing about the gangster complex. Women are attracted to you because you're a gangster. Of course, you're dressed well, you're a bit flash, and you've obviously got money, even if you're not spending it at the Pigalle. But that's not why women are drawn to you. It's the aura of danger, violence, and evil that captivates even very attractive, high-class women, especially if you're with the firm. They'd come on strong and you wouldn't refuse it. Not everybody who hung around the firm was so decorative, but even the deadbeats had their uses. At the Double R, there was always a retired drunk solicitor. He was perpetually crying or on the verge of it. You could go in and get free advice off this guy, just like Doc Blasker. Then there were toffs like Lord Howard of Effingham, who joined the twins on the board of Esmeralda's barn. He was an earl who had no hereditary wealth whatever. He was so hard up, he was prepared to work for Ron and Reg at £15 a week. His title would have looked good on the letterhead and the company records, which is obviously why Ronnie was so keen to have Effingham on hand. Many top companies have lords on the board today for much the same reason, so perhaps the twins were ahead of their time. Then we always had a couple of priests out of Bethnal Green, one Catholic, one Anglican, both queer. And there was a mayor, who used to show up wearing his silly chain alongside the twins whenever the local newspaper photographers were flashing. What on earth got into these people that they should want to hang around punks? This mayor didn't need their votes. Labour had run the town halls for generations round our way, so his lot were bound to get elected. The weirdest group of people snuggling up to the twins were businessmen. There was one guy called Lenny Martin, who rode himself into the Krays. First he sent them each a gold watch, but kind of anonymously. For months, Tommy Cowley was the only person on the firm who knew who he was. He wasn't supposed to tell anyone else the guy's name, not even the twins. He just called him the mystery man. But if they were ever short of money, Cowley would go to him, and he would come up with £500 or £1,000. This was totally down to Martin. There was no pressure or extortion from the twins, because they didn't know who he was. It was the gangster complex again, working its magic power to delude sane people into acts of extraordinary stupidity. Then, somehow, his name came out, and the twins got hold of him properly. It now came out that he ran a firm called High Heat, which installed central heating systems. Outwardly, he was straight, but if that was so, I can't see why he would ever have wanted to get involved. He never got anything out of them. But now they were into him. They put one of their distant relatives into High Heat as a senior salesman. Then they stuck a girl into his office. So now they knew everything about his business. Silly boy. Then I was put on the payroll, and I got to know Lenny Martin pretty well. He came to the pub one night, and Tommy Cowley introduced him. He said he thought I looked like Henry Cooper, which I did. And he asked if I could do a bit of work for him. Just acting, walking around, pretending I was his bodyguard. Apparently he'd been telling people he had heavy connections, and I was just the guy to prove it. He wanted someone big enough and ugly enough to frighten people, so I became his minder, not just in his business. I used to escort him to big fights too. At this time, central heating was a comparatively new thing, and High Heat used to sell it door to door, like the double glazing guys did a few years later. Obviously, the twins were nailing Martin for payments every week. He was happy to pay because he knew this gave him a bolt hole. Even if he got done legally, or legitimate people were howling for his blood, he had somewhere to go. He had protection, and he needed it. Irate customers were always complaining that their central heating system wasn't working. They'd come in the office demanding that if he didn't put things right, he must give them their money back. They had every reason to be mad, and they'd start shouting, but emboldened by me standing behind him, he would just shout back. I would growl at them too. Now that was a respectable businessman. The Krays weren't the only mob with a piece of his company. In 1970, after I broke with the Krays, and they were all locked up, I went back and saw him. The office was still there, and I took some money off him, even though he knew I no longer had the firm behind me. He must have thought it was wonderful to hang around gangsters. I don't know why the guy did it. There's got to be some psychiatrist who will tell you. There were lots of people like that. One day, they got hold of a car site owner called Johnny Hutton. They brought him to the house in Valence Road and sat him on a chair in the middle of the room, whilst three of us were ready in the other room, dressed in identical Macs and wearing stocking masks. The twins gave him a terrible dressing down and told him how much money they wanted off him. Then Ronnie said, "Now we want this money every week, and if anybody in this room gets nicked, this is what will happen." Then we three were marched in. We didn't have to say a word. We just walked in a circle round the chair, staring at him. And then we walked out again. Then the twins said to this guy, "Now, them people have got your face, but you don't know who they are. So if anybody gets nicked, they'll come and see you." That was another respectable businessman scared out of his wits. The twins performed this ritual because back in the late 1950s, Hutton had been shot and he'd had the nerve to call the police. No one was nicked, but he had to be frightened into not going to the law again. Then there was the battle of the rival boxing promoters. These two young guys were both on the way up, but they were getting in each other's way. One of them decided to sabotage a show that the other was promoting, so he approached the twins and put up some money for us to fuse the lights during the main bout. He also supplied us with ringside tickets, so we had cover for being there. Well, we took the money, and some of us sat in the ringside seats, but far from one of our guys fusing the lights. We made sure nobody touched them. This was a good venue, and nobody wanted to see it ruined for up-and-coming local fighters. So we protected the fuse box and all the cables, and we kept the money. But the rising star of the boxing game never dared protest. Who could he complain to? What would he tell the cops? All this was pretty small stuff. The twins wanted to get into the real big time, so their role models, Ronnie's especially, had to be the mob bosses of America, the mafiosi of the American syndicate. This was another aspect of the twins' own gangster complex. They wanted to be up there with the superstars of crime, Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, and Meyer Lansky. The biggest New York crime family got a spectacular foothold in London in 1964, when the Colony Casino Club opened up in Berkeley Square. It's pretty clear now that Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano were tied in with this place. Two of its directors, Dino Cellini and the frontman George Raft, were nominees of the Genovese crime family in New York, which Luciano had headed before he got deported to Italy. Lansky had been the family's financial brains and its main casino strategist from Las Vegas to Havana to the Bahamas and now London. He didn't need to come here personally. The whole operation could be handled by Cellini and other capable mechanics. When the twins realized how big these guys were, they felt their own status as London's biggest crime family should be respected. They wanted to be given percentage points in the colony, a share of the profits. The Americans didn't see things the same way. They refused them a piece of the action, but they did agree to pay the twins a fixed sum on a regular basis. By our standards, it was a lot of money. £500 a week, or £3,500 paid every quarter. I know it was over £3,000 because I had ideas of putting the colony on my milk round, collecting the money and whipping my family off to Ireland. In Dublin, in the 1960s, you could start a good little business with £3,500. But I was never allowed to collect from the colony. That was little Tommy Cowley's job. He used to collect it from the club manager, Alf Solkin, who was an Englishman on the colony board. At the time, Cowley was trying to tie up a casino junket scheme with the Yanks. The idea would have been to fly plane loads of American gamblers to London, take them into Esmeralda's barn as well as the colony, and fleece them over 48 hours. This would have been done repeatedly, and both joints would have made millions. But, as with so many of the twins' great schemes, it never came off. After all, why should the guys behind the colony share such a lucrative racket with the twins, when they could handle the entire operation themselves? The whole scheme shows yet again that the twins were suffering from delusions of grandeur. The Mafia just did not consider the twins fit to be their partners. The Mafia despised the twins. Ronnie and Reggie weren't paid to look after the colony. They were paid to stay away. The colony guys knew from what had happened over at Esmeralda's barn that if the twins visited a club 3 times on the trot, they would ruin it. When rich people go out for an evening, they don't want to look at thugs grunting in a corner. They don't want to be glared at and insulted by them. That would ruin anyone's pleasure. There was a particular incident that provoked the £500 a week payoff. One evening, the twins went into the colony's restaurant and did their usual takeover act, lounging around to make sure everybody knew the boys were in town. But there were a couple of visiting mafiosi sitting in another corner. They were disgusted by this act, and they wanted to know who these punks were. When they were told, "This is the Krays," that's when they ordered, "Pay these guys to stay out. They're bad for business." In their eyes, the Krays were like Capone's people back in the 1920s, too rough and too obviously crooks to be allowed into any establishment trying to pass itself off as respectable. They were embarrassing to be around. Even with their fake good manners, they were rough and ready. None of us on the firm was any better, except for Charlie Kray. Sure, we all wore three-piece suits and expensive jewellery, and we weren't totally repellent, but we were still low life compared to Sir So-and-so, sitting in the corner with Lady Bloody-Blah. So, of course, the people who ran the colony didn't want us in there. They didn't want men sitting around with scars and broken noses, especially as we hadn't come to gamble and lose. The colony was forking up all that money. £14,000 a year then would be worth around £200,000 a year today, just so the entire firm would stay away. You might be thinking that this sum was so large it couldn't have been just stay-away money, but the colony was making millions. It was making far more in a night than it was paying the firm in an entire year. The twins only had to create a big scene on just one night, and the colony would lose far more than 14 grand. It would also have made sense for the Mafia to pay off London's worst thugs, because it stopped the twins running to their police friends to get the place shut down. Even so, it was hard for the twins to swallow the ban on visiting the colony. It was so much of a humiliation that Ronnie couldn't admit it to the rest of us. He just said there was some rule there about not letting the faces in. He told us all to keep away from the colony because they took photos up there. I know they both really wanted to use the club because it was the best place to be on show. Before the ban, they made a fuss of George Raft. One night, they even brought him down to the Starlight when I was looking after it. "Take his coat, Albert," said Reg, as if I were a cloakroom attendant. Raft was only there a short while, then I gave him his coat back. They were showing him round to impress him, but it was such a sleazy little place. The visit probably had the opposite effect. In 1967, Raft was booted out of London. So was Dino Cellini, and all the other known American mobsters involved in the colony. The casino itself closed ahead of a new gambling law that tried, fairly successfully, to keep organised crime out of Britain's casinos. By then, Esmeralda's barn was long gone. Under the new setup, the twins would never have got a casino licence. You had to be what's called a fit and proper person. Crazy killers with long criminal records wouldn't qualify, and the killing had scarcely begun. Well, that's all for this time, guys. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I